July 4th, 1946, Biskupia Gorka Hill. The morning sun rises over a scene that defies logic. Workers are busy on the slope. They are not building a house or a stage. They are constructing a massive scaffold. Hammers strike wood. Boards are nailed into place. Men test the strength of thick hemp ropes. The sound of construction echoes across the hillside. Why did the crowds gather so early? It wasn't just curiosity. It was a hunger for retribution. By 10 in the morning, citizens begin to arrive. By noon, the trickle turns into a flood. They come on rusted bicycles. They arrive in horse-drawn carts. Most come on foot. Among them walk the former prisoners of Stutthof concentration camp. Their progress is slow. Their bodies are still recovering from months of starvation and typhus. Polish families join them. These people suffered under the Nazi occupation for years. Now they have come to witness the promise of the new government. Justice. By 4 in the afternoon, the hill is packed. 200,000 people. It is the largest public gathering in the history of post-war Poland. They stand shoulder to shoulder. The air is thick. The silence feels almost sacred. At first glance, a festival crowd, but in reality, an execution tribunal. On the wooden platform, 11 nooses swing gently in the afternoon breeze. 5 of them are reserved for women. Events accelerated. Just before 5 o'clock, military trucks ascend the hill. They carry the condemned. Soldiers lead the prisoners onto the scaffold. Their hands are bound tight behind their backs. The crowd sees them. The silence breaks. The people roar. It is a terrifying sound. Years of rage, grief, and physical pain erupt in a single noise. It rolls across the hillside like thunder. In the frame, 11 figures with ropes around their necks. 5 are women. One stands out, Jenny-Wanda Barkmann, 24 years old. Even now, in her final moments, she looks misplaced. Her dark hair is perfectly styled. Her makeup is applied with meticulous care. She wears her best dress. Survivors called her the beautiful Specter. Standing there with the rough hemp against her skin, she maintains the illusion to the very end. Beautiful, composed, elegant. The footage shows she does not look at the ground. She looks at the crowd. She acts as if this were a performance, and she is the star. In a moment, the trucks will pull away. Gravity will do its work. These 11 people will drop. But the script was about to break. Something was about to happen that nobody expected. "200,000 people held their breath. The truck beneath Jenny Barkmann's feet refused to move. The driver turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. Silence returned to the square. The executioner tried again, a metallic grinding sound. Then, nothing. Barkmann stands frozen on the flatbed. The noose is already tight around her neck. She faces a sea of witnesses waiting to die, yet still breathing. The smell of unburnt fuel hangs in the heat. Why did the engine fail? It seemed like a mechanical error, but fate had a darker script prepared. A low murmur ripples through the crowd. Someone shouts. Suddenly, a figure breaks the police line. The camera tracks a man running toward the gallows. He wears the tattered, striped remnants of a prisoner uniform. He's a skeletal figure, skin stretched tight over bone, barely recovered from the starvation of Stutthof. But he moves with terrifying purpose. The guards lower their rifles. They do not stop him. He climbs onto the truck bed. He stands next to Jenny Barkmann. This is the woman who sent his friends to the gas chambers. Now she is within his reach. There were no words. He places his hands on her back and pushes. Barkmann drops. The rope snaps taut with a sickening crack. Her body jerks violently. Her legs kick at the empty air, searching for a foothold that isn't there. Her carefully styled hair whips around her face, masking her expression. The footage shows the beautiful Specter is thrashing on the end of the rope. At first glance, a quick execution. But in reality, a slow, agonizing suffocation. This is the short drop. It does not break the neck. It does not sever the spinal cord. It simply crushes the windpipe. The airway collapses. The lungs burn. 200,000 people watch as she fights for oxygen that will never come. Thus ended the life of a monster. This is the story of the female guards of Stutthof concentration camp, and I am warning you now. What these women did, and exactly how they died, will leave you shaken. But here's the detail that makes this file truly disturbing. These were not lifelong Nazis. They were not raised in hatred. Open their personnel files. In 1944, they were ordinary civilians, shop girls, tramway conductors, housemaids. They volunteered for camp duty for the salary. But this was only the beginning. In less than a year, they transformed. They became sadistic killers who beat women to death with birch sticks. They selected children for gas chambers. They tortured prisoners for simple entertainment. July 4th, 1946. Justice caught up with them. The camera records, a row of gallows, and a massive crowd. It was the most public execution Poland had ever seen. The journey from ordinary young women to convicted war criminals was complete. This is a story about how quickly evil can consume a human soul. Before we analyze the evidence, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Because youth and beauty did not protect them. And the hangman was waiting. 35 kilometers. That was the specific distance separating the city of Gdansk from the site of the atrocity. The location was calculated with cold precision. To the north, the Baltic Sea. To the east, the Vistula River. On all other sides, dense forests and deep marshes blocked the horizon. It was a geographical trap. Nature itself served as the perimeter wall. September 2nd, 1939. This date is critical. Germany invaded Poland on the 1st. Stutthof opened on the 2nd. Why was the camp established with such immediate speed? The Nazis were not just securing territory, they were initiating a purge. Stutthof was the first camp outside the pre-war borders, and its purpose was instant destruction. The first targets were the educated class, professors, priests, local politicians. The strategy was to decapitate Polish society before resistance could form. The SS did not just arrest them, they hunted them down, loaded them onto trucks and drove them into the woods. The sound of shovels hitting dirt echoed through the trees. The prisoners were forced to dig long trenches. Then came the order. The firing squads raised their rifles. The victims fell into the very pits they had excavated moments before. Over the next 6 years, 110,000 people passed through the gates. Starvation hollowed out their bodies. Typhus swept through the barracks. Guards beat inmates for minor infractions. 65,000 never walked out. 1943 brought a shift in operations. The SS demanded industrial efficiency. They constructed a brick gas chamber and a crematorium. It was small compared to the factories of death at Auschwitz. The capacity was roughly 150 people, but the method was identical. The footage shows Zyklon B pellets drop through the ceiling vents. Within 30 minutes, the screaming stopped. Prisoners from the Sonderkommando dragged the limp bodies to the ovens. The chimney smoked day and night. But this was only the beginning. June 1944. The Soviet army pushed west. The Nazis began a frantic evacuation of the Baltic states. Trains rolled into Stutthof from Riga, Kaunas, and Vilnius. Thousands of Jewish women and children were packed into cattle cars. They traveled for days without water. When the doors opened, many were already dead. Events accelerated. In January 1945, the transports arrived from the south. The Nazis evacuated Auschwitz-Birkenau. Survivors who had endured the selections of Dr. Mengele arrived at Stutthof. At first glance, a reprieve from the gas chambers, but in reality, a transfer to a different hell. The camp collapsed under the weight of the numbers. It was built for 10,000. By autumn, it held 50,000. People slept on the floor, on top of each other, in filth. The SS lost control of the perimeter. The overcrowding was catastrophic. They needed manpower. Specifically, they needed women to police the female barracks. Archives show recruitment posters appeared in the streets of Gdansk. The administration targeted young women, ages 18 to 25. The pitch was attractive. The pay was higher than factory wages. The food rations were generous. The job was listed simply as supervision. Many volunteered. They left their homes, signed the contracts, and put on the uniform. They were handed heavy leather boots and truncheons. Maybe the recruiters lied about the brutality. Maybe they omitted the torture. Or perhaps the women saw the smoke rising over the marshes and took the job anyway. There was no turning back. 1944 marked the point of no return. In that year, the German war machine mobilized its final reserves, dragging thousands of women into the machinery of the state. Some were conscripted against their will, others stepped forward voluntarily. But among the files of the nameless 5 specific dossiers stand out: Jenny-Wanda Barkmann, Gerda Steinhoff, Elizabeth Becker, Oa Paradis, Wanda Klaff. These names did not remain obscure. They were not born monsters. They were neighbors. They were ordinary citizens. But the war exposed something dormant within them. The first file opens on Jenny-Wanda Barkmann, born May 30th, 1922, Hamburg. Her early records show nothing alarming: a middle-class family, an adequate education, no criminal history. But Jenny carried a burning ambition. She did not want to be ordinary. She possessed a striking, sharp beauty, high cheekbones, dark manicured hair, an elegant posture that commanded attention on the street. She did not look like a laborer. She obsessed over fashion magazines. She visualized herself walking the high runways of Paris and Berlin. She craved the camera flash and the admiration of the crowd. She believed she was destined for fame. Why didn't she become a model? The war crushed the industry. Silk became parachutes. Runways turned into rubble. The Reich demanded labor, not beauty. Girls like Jenny faced a grim future: gray factory floors, grease on their hands, and 12-hour shifts assembling munitions in the cold. It was a life of invisibility. But this was only the temporary state of affairs. In 1944, a new path opened. The SS began recruiting women for auxiliary positions. The posters promised a different life. The position offered decent pay. It guaranteed food rations far superior to what factory workers ate. It offered status, and it offered a uniform. At first glance, a simple administrative job, but in reality, a license to dominate. The job description was sanitized. You supervise, you maintain order, you guard the camp perimeter. There was no mention of mass graves. For a 21-year-old woman hungry for prestige, the offer was perfect. Jenny did not hesitate. She walked into the recruitment office. She signed the papers. She was accepted immediately. Photographs from the time show why. Her beauty was an asset. The SS leadership valued attractive women in these roles. It created a psychological weapon against the prisoners. A detainee looks up and sees a flawless, beautiful face. Then, that face orders a beating. This cognitive dissonance made the terror more effective. Events accelerated. Barkmann arrived at the Stutthof concentration camp in the summer of 1944. She was not assigned to the laundry or the kitchen. The orders sent her directly to SK3. This was the women's sub-camp. The archives confirm this was one of the most brutal sectors in the entire complex. Her modeling career began here amidst the barbed wire. Block SK3. That was the destination for Jewish women evacuated from the Baltic camps and transferred from Auschwitz. They arrived in a state of total collapse, skeletal, sick, dying from months of starvation. They wore filthy striped dresses that hung loosely on their bones. Their heads were shaved clean. On their arms, blue numbers were tattooed for identification. Inside the barracks, the conditions were inhuman. They slept on bare wooden bunks, no bedding, no straw. The space was packed so tightly that prisoners could not lie down. They slept sitting up, pressed against strangers. Rations were minimal: 1 meal per day, a bowl of watery soup and a crust of bread. It was barely enough to sustain life. Disease ran rampant: typhus, dysentery, tuberculosis. Every illness thrived in the filth and overcrowding. Women died every night. In the morning, other prisoners carried the bodies out. They stacked them like cordwood outside the barracks. But Jenny Barkmann discovered something in this environment. She loved it. Why did she enjoy the misery? Because she loved the power. She fed on the fear. She held absolute authority over these broken women. They had to obey her every command or face death. She patrolled the barracks like a hunter. In her hand, she always carried a whip or a riding crop. She struck randomly. For no reason other than her own entertainment, she would point at a prisoner. The order was simple: push-ups or squats. The woman had to move until she collapsed from exhaustion. Then, Barkmann beat her for falling. It got worse. She participated in the selections for the gas chambers. She stood with SS doctors, inspecting the lines. determining who was useful and who would die. At first glance, a routine inspection, but in reality, a game. Survivors testified that Barkmann approached these life or death choices casually, like she was shopping. One finger. That was all it took to end a life. Jenny Barkmann walked down the rows of shivering prisoners. She moved slowly. Her hand rose, pointing to the left, then the right. It looked casual, like a housewife choosing apples at a market. But she wasn't buying fruit. She was selecting women and children for the gas chambers. The footage shows she is smiling while she works. Witnesses testified about that expression. It wasn't nervous laughter. It was genuine amusement. The prisoners gave her a name, the beautiful Specter. Beautiful because she had the looks of a movie star. Specter because she left only corpses behind. Why did she do it? It wasn't just orders, it was pleasure. One survivor testified to the violence. Barkmann didn't always use weapons. She used her bare hands. She struck sick women. She beat them until the screaming stopped, until the movement ceased on the cold concrete floor. Another witness described a different kind of pain, psychological torture. Barkmann would gather prisoners. She told them they were free. She watched the hope light up in their eyes. Then she laughed. The joke was over. She sent them straight to the gas chamber instead. For 9 months, from 1944 to early 1945, she ruled her section of Stutthof. She was a sadistic queen, but the reign ended. January 1945. The ground shook from artillery. Soviet forces were close. The SS panicked and began evacuations. Barkmann didn't wait. She fled to Gdansk. She burned her uniform. She forged papers and changed her hair. She tried to become a ghost in the crowd. She thought she had vanished. But the hunt was just beginning. Gerda Steinhoff was different. Born January 29, 1922. Her early life was silent. A housemaid on a farm, a worker in a bakery, a tramway conductor collecting tickets. But in 1944, everything changed. She married, she had a child, and she answered the Nazi call for guards. October 1st, 1944. Steinhoff entered the camp. She became a block leader in the SK3 women's sector. Her duties were simple. Stand beside the SS doctors, look at the prisoners, point out the weak. The camera records the process, rows of starving women, the cold wind, the quick nods of the guards. Those she pointed at died. She did this multiple times a week. Hundreds vanished on her watch. Her efficiency impressed the command. On October 31st, just 1 month later, she received a promotion. SS Oberaufseherin, senior overseer. Now she ran an entire sub-camp. But the horror didn't stop at the camp gates. It followed her to the courtroom. At first glance, a scared young mother. But in reality, a monster without regret. During the trial, the newsreels caught disturbing images. Steinhoff sits in the dock. She smiles. She jokes with the other defendants. She fixes her hair. There's no shame in her eyes. She treated the trial like a dull theater performance. Elisabeth Becker came from Prussia. She arrived at Stutthof in the summer of 1944. Her assignment was section SK3. Her targets were women and children. She conducted the selections. She decided who would breathe and who would choke on gas. In court, she admitted to sending 30 women to their deaths. The real number was likely in the hundreds, but the legal process took a strange turn. Even among the butchers of Stutthof, Becker seemed different. The court found her less brutal than Steinhoff or Barkmann. She had served only a few months. She hadn't beaten prisoners to death with her own fists. The judges hesitated. They recommended mercy. They proposed commuting her death sentence to 15 years in prison. But the final decision lay with the Polish president, Bolesław Bierut. He looked at the file. He saw the signatures. He saw the lists of the dead. There was no room for pity. Bierut rejected the recommendation. Becker had participated. She had pointed her finger. That was enough. The verdict stood. She would hang with the rest. Then there was Iwa Paradis. She is the guard we know least about. A wooden club against a human skull. That is the clearest memory survivors have of Ewa Paradis. Who was she before the camp? No files remain. Her background is a blank page, but her actions at Stutthof left permanent scars. Witnesses at the trial did not hesitate. They pointed her out, they called her vicious. One survivor took the stand. He described a sick woman unable to stand during roll call. Paradis did not call a doctor. She raised a heavy wooden club. She struck the woman until the bone cracked. The violence was not always physical. It was psychological. Another witness testified to a cruel game. Paradis held food in front of starving prisoners. She waited for them to beg. She watched them cry. Then she laughed and walked away, eating the bread herself. In the courtroom, there was no shame. She sat calmly. Her defense was simple. She was just doing her job. She was following orders. But this was only the beginning. March 6, 1922. Wanda Klaff was born in Danzig, the daughter of a railway worker. She joined the camp staff and transformed. She didn't just guard the prisoners, she hunted them. Survivors testified that Klaff dispensed unconsciousness for minor errors. A prisoner made eye contact. A beating. Someone walked too slowly. A beating. One incident silenced the courtroom. A witness described a pregnant woman standing before Klaff. The guard saw the pregnancy. She kicked the woman in the stomach. She did not stop. She kicked until the woman miscarried on the dirt. The prisoner lay bleeding on the ground. Klaff continued to strike her. At first glance, a young woman in uniform, but in reality, a sadist who viewed murder as a sport. The trial records confirm it. Klaff volunteered for extra shifts. She requested duty at the selections. She wanted to send more people to the gas chambers personally. The camera footage captures her demeanor in the dock. She is smiling. She is joking with the other defendants. She treated the massacre as entertainment. 5 women. They worked at Stutthof from mid-1944 to January 1945, less than 1 year. In that short time, they facilitated the deaths of thousands, selections, beatings, starvation, disease. Conditions at Stutthof were a death sentence by design. The camp was built for 10,000 prisoners. By late 1944, it held over 50,000. The overcrowding was catastrophic. Prisoners were packed onto wooden bunks, no mattresses, no blankets. They lay so tightly together that movement was impossible. The diet was calculated to kill. 1 meal a day, watery soup, a single slice of stale bread. Starvation was universal. Immune systems collapsed. In December 1944, hygiene vanished completely. A typhus epidemic exploded across the barracks. There was no medicine. Archive photos show the result, piles of bodies waiting for disposal. But the peak of the horror arrived in January. January 1945. 250 prisoners died every single day. The camp's brick crematorium failed. It could not keep pace with the volume of death. Bodies stacked up against the exterior walls like firewood. The SS found a crude solution. They constructed open-air pyres. They laid down heavy logs, then a layer of corpses, then more wood. Gallons of fuel oil soaked the piles. The fires burned day and night. The heavy, greasy smell of burning flesh hung over the camp. It never lifted. At first glance, a system of order, but in reality, a machine of terror run by female guards. These women did not just supervise, they dominated. They forced prisoners to stand for roll calls in the freezing wind. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. If a prisoner collapsed from the cold, the guards beat them. If a prisoner was too weak to work, the guards cut their rations. Hunger became a weapon. Why did they act with such ferocity? It was efficient. Terror kept the thousands in line. Every morning brought a new selection. The guards walked the rows. They pointed a finger at the sickest inmates. That gesture was a death sentence. The chosen were dragged to the gas chambers. These women were the visible face of the Nazi regime. They were the ones the prisoners saw every morning. They held the power of life and death in a single glance. But the war was turning. Soviet forces closed the distance. The artillery fire grew louder. In late January, the SS evacuated Stutthof. 50,000 prisoners were pushed out of the gates. They began a death march toward the west. The conditions were impossible. Snow covered the roads. The temperature dropped far below freezing. The guards walked alongside the columns with rifles ready. They did not tolerate lag. Anyone who fell behind was shot on the spot. The roads became graveyards. Thousands froze in the snowbanks. Others were driven into ditches and executed. Some were forced into the freezing waters of the Baltic Sea and drowned. But this was only the beginning. The guards who survived the march tried to vanish. They discarded their uniforms. They forged papers. They hoped to disappear into the chaotic collapse of Germany. They thought the world would forget. Poland did not forget. May 9, 1945. Soviet and Polish troops entered Stutthof. The camp was silent, but they found survivors. Approximately 100 prisoners had hidden during the evacuation. They crawled out of the shadows. They pointed to the evidence. The footage from the era shows the scale of the crime: mountains of shoes, piles of ash, and stacks of administrative ledgers. Investigators secured photographs and took testimonies. The Polish government moved fast. They launched a manhunt for the staff. They checked checkpoints. They raided homes. Jenny-Wanda Barkmann was spotted at a train station in Gdansk in May. She stood on the platform with false identity papers in her pocket. She looked like a civilian refugee, but her face was too memorable. Police officers approached her. Former prisoners had provided detailed descriptions of her features. The beautiful Spectre was in handcuffs before she could board a train. Other arrests followed quickly. Gerda Steinhoff was captured. Elizabeth Becker, Owa Paradis, Wanda Clave. There was no escape. Police dragged them from their hiding spots. They were thrown into Polish prisons. Prosecutors sat them down in interrogation rooms. The evidence was laid out on the table. The investigation was over. The time for judgment had arrived. April 25, 1946. The gavel struck in Gdansk. The first Stutthof trial began. Why did the world watch this specific courtroom? It seemed like a local tribunal, but this was the first public reckoning for the sadistic staff of the Stutthof concentration camp. 13 defendants sat in the dock. A glass box separated them from the angry crowd. Among them were 5 women. Next to them sat SS Obersturmführer Johann Pauls, the commander of the guards. 6 others were Polish kapos, prisoners who had betrayed their own to collaborate with the Nazis. The proceedings lasted 5 weeks, from late April to May 31, 1946. The prosecutor did not rely on paper files alone. He brought the victims into the room. Survivor after survivor took the stand. They did not just speak, they pointed. Fingers trembled as they identified their tormentors. The footage shows witnesses rolling up sleeves to show scars. They described specific atrocities: the sound of wood striking bone, the chaos of the selections, the silence after a murder. The testimony was heavy, detailed, and overwhelming. At first glance, the defendants looked like ordinary citizens, but in reality, they were instruments of a death factory. The accused offered weak defenses. Some claimed they were merely following orders. Others insisted they never hurt anyone. They called the survivors liars. Gerda Steinhoff did not look afraid. She smiled at the gallery. She whispered jokes to her neighbor. She acted as if the trial was light entertainment, but there was no mistake. The evidence was solid. Jenny-Wanda Barkmann sat apart. She maintained her composure. Her hair was styled. Her bearing was elegant. She looked at the judges with absolute confidence. She believed she would be acquitted. She believed her beauty would save her. She was wrong. May 31, 1946. The court delivered the verdicts. The atmosphere in the hall shifted. All 13 defendants were found guilty of crimes against humanity. The sentences were severe. 12 of them, including all 5 women, were sentenced to death by hanging. Only 1 received a prison term. The court was clear. These women had not just watched, they had participated. They selected prisoners for the gas chambers. They beat inmates to death with their own hands. They were cogs in a system designed to exterminate human beings. The superior orders defense was rejected. The judge stated the facts. They could have refused. They could have transferred to other duties. They chose to stay. They chose to participate. Now they would pay the price. The condemned had 1 month to appeal. Most showed fear. But Jenny-Wanda Barkmann maintained her arrogance to the very end. Even after the interpreter read the death sentence, she seemed to believe she would escape the noose. A reporter asked if she understood the gravity of the verdict. Her reply shocked the courtroom. "Life is indeed a pleasure, and pleasures are usually short." It was a flippant remark, almost a joke. It suggested she viewed her entire existence, including this trial, as a trivial game. She did not grasp the reality of the situation, or perhaps she grasped it perfectly and simply did not care. She had spent months playing God in Block SK3. She had decided who lived and who died with a casual gesture. Now the game was over. She combed her hair while the hangman prepared the rope. The first woman had disconnected from the cold, concrete reality completely. To her, the execution was an abstract concept, a bad dream that would not actually happen. She spent her final hours in the damp cell, focusing on her reflection. She styled her locks. She applied makeup with steady hands. She smoothed her dress. The goal was simple: remain a beautiful specter until the very last second. Elizabeth Becker saw things differently. Terror paralyzed her. She understood exactly what was coming. She grabbed a pen and paper. She wrote to Polish President Bolesław Bierut, one letter, then another, then a third. The paper rustled in her trembling grip. Her handwriting started neat, but degraded into a desperate, jagged scrawl as the execution date approached. She pleaded her case with frantic precision. She had arrived at Stutthof in August 1944. She left in December, 4 months, just 120 days. She argued that she was not a monster like the others. She was 27, young. She had a whole life ahead of her. Why did she expect mercy? The court had actually recommended commuting her sentence to 15 years in prison. They believed her crimes were less severe than the atrocities committed by the senior guards. But the pardon never came. She admitted to participating in the selections, but only 30 women. She emphasized the number in her letters. Only 30. As if there's a safe limit for murder. As if sending 30 human beings to the gas chambers is a forgivable administrative error, because others sent hundreds. Gerda Steinhoff showed no such desperation. She treated the death cell like a social club. She stood by the bars. She chatted with the other condemned women. She cracked jokes. Laughter echoed off the stone walls. It sounded like a dormitory at a girls' boarding school. It did not sound like the waiting room for the gallows. At first glance, a woman at ease, but in reality, a sociopath incapable of remorse. The trial footage records a disturbing detail. Steinhoff is smiling. To her, the legal proceedings were an amusing distraction. Survivors stood a few feet away. They detailed how she dragged children to their deaths. They described the screams on the selection ramp. Steinhoff looked away. She looked bored. She examined her fingernails. Her defense remained rigid throughout the process. She was an employee. She had orders. She followed them. What else was she supposed to do?